Hey guys, this is Jaybird from UGX Mods, and I'm going to be doing a tutorial on traps for Black Ops 3. And this is going to be continuing off of the base script that we created last time with the purchase loop. We're going to implement that into a basic trap. So this is going to have two parts here. One part's going to be in Radiant, the other part's going to be actual scripting, but this is going to be more classified as a scripting tutorial. So I kind of have everything set up from where we were last time here with the purchase loop. The thing is, there's one thing I kind of want to change here, and it's kind of the way the trigger's set up, and it's more specific because of the way the traps work. Sometimes you like having two triggers to actually activate the actual setup for the trap. So you could have like one trigger on one side of the trap and the other trigger on the other side, so that way you can hit the trap, like you can activate it from either side of the trap. And but the way we have it set up right now is it's only watching for one trigger. So the way we're going to have to change that is to make this an array of triggers. So what we can do is both triggers in Radiant can be still called trap trigger, but we're going to have to make this an array, and then actually we can't call this as one entity because now trigger is actually triggers. It's multiple triggers. The game's treating it as an array of variables, but I can't just call triggers on the function because triggers would be the array, not the individual trigger itself. We want each individual trigger to call this function. So what we're going to end up having to do is an array thread, but I haven't really looked into if Black Ops 3 has the old array thread function, so we're going to have to do a quick for loop here, and we'll go for I equals 0. So we're going to loop through this array. So we're going to start off with, a for loop starts off with our index, and I'm starting my index at the index 0. And what I can do is I can go I is less than triggers.size. So what's going to happen is it's going to start at 0. I have a colon here separating each section of this, so basically, or a semicolon. So it'll start at 0, and then it will increment each time. We're going to tell it to increment by 1, so I++, so this is the increment operator, and it's going to increment I, our index, by 1, and it's going to stop when it's going to keep going until I is equal to triggers.size. So if it's starting at 0 and it's ending at the last loop through would be 1 less than the triggers, that 0 is counting as 1, so it would do it would loop through every single trigger once by starting at 0 and ending one element before the max size of trigger. So, one sec, make sure I actually got triggers instead of trigger because I actually changed the name of the variable now. So what we'll do is we have our for loop, and we want triggers to be inside of here. And since this is an array, what we can do is we can put our variable I, our index I, on the triggers, so then it will do the it will thread the individual element of triggers at index I. So if I had two triggers, I'd have trigger 0 and trigger 1. So it's going to come through with I equaling 0 for the first one, so trigger 0, watch trigger, and we're going to actually want to thread this. Remember what I told you guys last time. If we want something to happen while this is called, we have to thread it. If we want it to complete something, if you want something to go all the way through the function and then go on, then you'd remove thread. But in this case, we want thread because we want multiple triggers to call this at the same time. So we'll have trigger 0 come in, and it will call this function, the watch trigger function, and then it will get incremented by 1, and then it will be I equals 1, so trigger 2 will now call, well, trigger 1, it's the second trigger, it will now call watch trigger. And then it will realize, since we had two triggers, I is now equal to triggers.size, so it's going to break out of the loop. It's not going to continue anymore. So now, that's for the for loop section of this. And then now our triggers will actually call watch trigger. Another thing that we're going to want to set up is hint strings for the trigger. because we want to be able to know that if you go up to the trigger, it'll say press and hold your use key to activate the trap. So we're going to want to set up a hint string. So set hint string, and it takes in a string variable, so we can uh, just put some brackets here, and then hold. And this is an interesting thing for strings. If you do the up arrow and then a number, you can change the color of the text. And what Treyarch likes to do is their use key, the F or the E or whatever you have it bound to, they will do up 3, and then that will change the color to yellow. And then if we want to do a generic use case, because if I just put F and somebody had it bound to E, they'd probably be really upset because it's like they're hitting F and nothing's happening. So what you can do is you can do one way is like you can type in, I think it's square bracket and then plus active and then end square bracket. But the way I've always been doing it since uh, World at War was and 1, so ampersand 1, and then that will do the same thing. And then we want to switch it back to white, which is up arrow 7. So this will go, hold is going to be white, our use key and our ampersand 1 is going to be yellow from the 3, and then we switch back to white, and then we can get hold use key to activate trap. And then they typically like to have something like cost, and then they'd have their number. But what if I put 500 here and say I change this, it's like, oh, I wanted this 750, I wanted this 1000 or whatever. It's not changing here. Let's make this more streamlined and try to make it so that if I just change the number up here, it'll change it in here as well. So what I can do here is get my close bracket here. So I have a space after the semicolon here, close bracket, then I'm going to space plus, and then so basically I'm adding a string together. So I'm going to go and put our variable trap cost right here. So it'll add our integer value of trap cost to our string right here, and then I can close this off by doing plus and then our end square bracket. So what will happen is our string will now have our trap cost dynamically changing with this. So if I put 500, this would be 500 in our string, and it'll show up properly. But let's keep it with 1000 because that's typical for traps. So that's the hint string. The other thing that you might notice is when you are doing a hint string, you'll get an icon, the little hand symbol that's typically on the power trigger. And a lot of people, it doesn't fit with a lot of the triggers. You just want the string. So what you can do is you can go self, uh, what is it? Set cursor hint. And then we want hint no icon. So this is setting the cursor icon for the trigger. And this is a predefined one, hint no icon, all caps. And what it will do is just remove that little hand symbol from your trigger because it doesn't really fit with the way they set up their triggers for the traps and whatnot. Like if you're doing perks, traps, wall buys, there's no hand symbol. They seem to only use it for specific things like the power. So we'll just set it as no icon for now. Okay, so that kind of sets up our triggers properly for the trap. We have our cost set up from last time. We have them set up so that we can do multiple triggers now. We also got our trap trigger hint strings working with no icon. The other thing that we're going to want to look into is our triggers now are going to, like if we want to do the code for our trap code down here, what's going to happen is you hit one trigger and it's going to be doing the trap code, but then the other trigger will be able to do it as well. So we want to be able to tell the game that if you hit one trigger, the other trigger now can't activate it. So we're going to have to play around with our little if statement here, and we're going to create a variable. It's basically going to be if our trap is on or if it's off. So it'll be true or false. So we'll go level dot trap active. And we'll set it to false because initially it's just going to be off. So what we're going to do here is with our trap uh, checking, or the trigger checking if we have enough points, we're going to also check if uh, our trap is active. So when doing an if statement, you can do multiple things in one if statement by using ampersand ampersand, which is the and. So there's different operators. If you're new to scripting, there's or, which is two straight lines. There's the two ampersands, which is and. Uh, there's equal. There's not equal. Like there's many different operators. I would suggest looking up basic coding if you're still very new to this. This is more of an advanced tutorial. But yeah, so we'll do player.score is greater than or equal to trap cost ampersand ampersand level dot trap active. So what this is going to do is since an if statement is checking for Boolean values, so it's just wanting to know true or false one Boolean value. So what ends up happening here is this will give us a Boolean value. It'll check to see if our score is greater than the trap cost, and if it is, it'll give us true. If it's not, it'll give us false. This is just true or false, on or off. So now we got a true or false for this and a true or false for this, but then the the and is checking if both of them are true. In both cases, if they are both true, then the whole thing is true. If one is not true, then it's false. If both are not true, then it's false. So both of these scenarios need to be true for this to be active. So our trap is now checking if it's active. So what we can do here is right in where we're calling or breaking out of this and doing all of our stuff, we can now do something like level dot trap active equals true. So when one trigger gets active, it's gonna set our variable trap active to true. So then if we come in with the other trigger and we try to hit the other trigger now and activate the trap twice at the same time, it's going to see that our trap is now active and it won't activate it again. So that will prevent any like logical issues with your trap activating twice accidentally and calling the functions twice. So that's just to fix the issue that would happen if you're using two triggers. So the next thing is we want to reset this for when the trap is done. So after our cooldown, we're going to probably want to set this back to false. And then that should have everything set up for the two triggers now. Um, the next thing we're probably going to want to look into is the trap itself. It's a lot of interpretation of how your trap is going to work. Not all traps are the same. Basic electric trap's pretty easy because it's just a damage trigger, or a trigger multiple, I should say, that has um, it's checking to see if a zombie or a player is touching it, and then that would have it so that I would get the thing that's touching the trigger and then apply damage to it. So that's a pretty basic one because it's a static trap. It's nothing's moving, no moving parts. However, something like the flogger required not only the damage trigger or the trigger multiple, but the moving parts. So I was rotating the pendulum part of the flogger, and what I did is I made a trigger that went over the entire pendulum, and then I linked that to the flogger. So it's basic. It's up to your interpretation. You could have moving parts. You could not have moving parts. I can go over a few things here. Like if you were to get your model, let's say your model get ent test model, something like that. Target name. So let's say you have a script model in Radiant, and you have a target name of test model. You could do something like model rotate, and then you have basically three different directions. They're kind of the same sort of directions used in aeronautics, where you'd have rotate yaw, you'd have rotate roll, and the last one is rotate pitch. So these all have the same parameters, and those would be the angle that you want to rotate it by. So say I wanted to do a full spin, I do 360 degrees. You also have the time as the second parameter. So say I wanted to do it in 5 seconds. And then you got two optional ones, which are the speed up and speed down. So basically, what's going to happen here is with this, it's going to rotate 360 degrees in the yaw direction with taking 5 seconds, but the first half a second here I have set up, it's going to be spinning up, so it's not at full speed yet. So it's going to take half a second to get up to full speed, and I put down here, it'll take half a second to get back down to a complete stop. So, and these two roll and pitch use the exact same method. So it starts off with the angle, the time, the speed up, and the slow down. So you can use those to get something spinning, which is a pretty basic one. Another thing you can do is moving parts. A move to is an interesting one because you can actually put in uh, the exact coordinates of where you want it to move to. So the thing with a move to is it's actually set up very similar to the rotate. You have, instead of the actual angles, now we have an origin. So an origin is an array. It's a it's basically an array of 3 elements, x, y, and z. So to do that, you'd have to do another set of parentheses, and you'd have your x, your y, and your z, and they're all separated by commas here. So this is actually a variable. It's a vector, um, and you'd also have your time as well. So if I wanted this to take 50 seconds, or if I wanted this to take 10 seconds, or whatever, you'd have this move to the origin. You would have to find this origin in radiant to actually be able to do this. Or what you can also do is, say you wanted to move specifically, like you wanted the model to move like 10 units to the right. What you could do is, instead of just putting in the direct coordinates from radiant, you could go model.origin and then plus, and then make a vector of, say you wanted it to move in the y direction 10 units, and then that was it. It wanted it, the model, it's going to go from its origin plus to origin plus 10 units in the y direction. It's going to take 10 seconds to get there. So that's just basic movement. And so it depends on what you want to do. Because if you wanted to trap crushing something, the move 2 is probably your best bet. And what you're going to want to do is you'd have your crush, like it crushing zombies. You'd have like a weight in here, weight 10. And then you'd want it to move back afterwards. The issue with this is uh, there's no damage going to be applied from a brush touching an entity. The zombies aren't going to die, uh, so we now have to look into how exactly the damage is going to be applied to these zombies. So let's say we are doing a model crushing some zombies. So we have our move to right now. The issue is the model doesn't affect the zombies, it doesn't affect the player. So what we're gonna have to do is get another trigger. So let's do damage trigger, and then we'll have one second here. So then in Radiant, we'll actually have to set up a damage trigger. So if you place a trigger multiple, specifically a trigger multiple, because these are probably the best bet that you have for doing traps, because you want to be able to check if a zombie's touching the trigger. You want to be able to check if a player's touching a trigger. And in fact, I'm actually going to open up, let's see, let's just open up a map file right now in the background, and I will show how the actual triggers are set up. But basically, we're going to get the damage trigger, and we're probably going to thread another function off of this one to check for the trigger while the trap is active. So we'll do damage trigger, and we'll thread it off to watch damage or something like that. And we'll create another function, watch damage. The interesting thing is, we're probably going to end up doing something like a while loop here, and it will just keep going through self, wait till, trigger, and then we're going to do entity. So we got our wait till, so the while loop's fine, we don't have an infinite loop going, but then what ends up happening is this is just going to keep checking forever. We don't have a way of stopping it right now. So a nice way to do this is, we have the damage trigger in here. We can use Call of Duty's notify system, uh, and what we can do is have the actual trigger get notified when this is done so that this function can end, because we don't want it to keep killing the zombie. So what we can do here is have the damage trigger is going to get notified when the trap is done, which is, we're going to have another wait 10 for it to move back, and what it's going to do is damage trigger notify, and then we can put a string in here and notify it specific strings. So when this happens, there's going to be a what's called a notify, and it allows the scripter here to check for when something occurs, and we can name that event. So we're going to call this trap end. So now when the trap moves back, this damage trigger is going to be notified of trap end. So in here, what we can do is, remember, self is the trigger, because that's what I called it on, and we're going to do end on. So it's going to end this function, and we're going to end on trap end. So now this function will end out breaking out of it when it gets notified of trap end. So you have to call that at the very beginning of the function for this to work as well. So this is pretty handy, the notify system that Treyarch's got going with this in all Call of Duties actually. So now what ends up happening is we get our damage trigger, we thread watch damage. We haven't got our logic here yet, but it's going to wait till something activates this trigger, and it's just going to keep doing that every time something activates it. And then we're going to move our model, wait 10 seconds, move it back, wait 10 seconds, and then the damage trigger is going to get notified, and our watch damage is going to get ended. It's going to wait the cooldown time, and the trap's going to be deactivated. So let's kind of look into what's going on the Radiant side of things here. So when we get our damage trigger, we're going to want some sort of actual trigger here. So what we can do is, if you bring up the entity window, this is B, by the way, I'm pressing B to get the entity window up. What I can do is go down to triggers, and a neat little thing here is a lot of people from World at War would be used to getting their entities through clicking, like right-clicking in the 2D grid. What ends up happening is they don't have a lot of stuff in this window here. So I've actually added some here, and what you can do is go in the entity browser here. If you don't like this setup, you can actually right click them and toggle favorite, so it'll come down here and add them to your right click. So it's kind of a neat trick to do, extra little thing you want to add in if you want. But yeah, so we're going to be doing a trigger multiple. So what you can do is just select a brush, double click trigger multiple, it'll convert that into a trigger multiple, or if you don't want to create the brush, you can just drag it right on and it'll create one for you. So now we got this trigger multiple, we want to bring up the entity info. So press N and it'll bring up entity info. And this is all the stuff similar to World at War, same shortcut to get to it and everything. What we're going to want to do is edit the target name here, and that's going to be what we called in our script, and that is test damage trigger. So that's what we're going to want to set up our trigger as, is test damage trigger. And now when we compile this in game and we compile our scripts, it will be able to get this trigger. So that's what the target name was used for. The other thing, there's one more thing we need to do. It's the spawn flags of the trigger. A lot of times what ends up happening is the triggers don't activate properly because of the spawn flags, and a lot of times people they overlook this because it's such a small thing. But in Radiant, you can control what the trigger is activated by, who the trigger is activated by, I should say, what type of entities. So right here we have all the entities that would trigger this. The thing is, we want the players, so we want these guys, AI access, that's what the zombies are going to be under. We don't want to check not player, because or else that's gonna, that means the player won't be able to trigger it at all. If you wanted, like if you created bots eventually in the future and you wanted them to be controlled or killed by the trap as well, you probably want to do AI allies as well, because those are going to be on the allies team, which is the team you're currently on. AI neutral, same idea. If you want them, I don't know what neutral would be for their team. I guess if you spawn them and it's like something that would go after zombies and players, I'm not sure. But if you want your allies and your zombies to be affected, so these are AI, then you want to check those. If you don't want the player to be affected by it, then you would check this. But we can also do that sort of check in script as well. But for this, for the zombies to be affected, we need to have AI axis selected. So that actually covers everything for that damage trigger. There's really not much to the physical entity itself. So you would line this up with your brush or whatever, and where you want the zombie to actually be killed by. And so I'll leave the actual setup of your model and your trap to yourself. I'm sure you have your own design and the way you want to do it, but this is what you would use to kill the zombie. So let's actually get the logic behind killing. The interesting thing is now we got to set it up basically to do specific things to the entity, but we can actually check for the entity similarly how we checked for the trap, the trigger cost, because we got the player. This time, I called it entity, call it whatever, but we can check if the entity is the player, or we can check if it's a zombie. We can determine what we want to do to a player, and we can determine what we want to do to a zombie. And that's kind of the idea I did with my flogger. If it was a player, I just killed them. If it was a zombie, not only did I kill them, I flung the body. You could fling the player, but not in the same way, but it would be an interesting concept. You'd have to spawn a struct, link the player to the struct, and then fling the struct. But that'd be kind of interesting to look at. Um, Maybe something I had in the future, who knows. Uh, so what we're going to want to do here is check for the entity and see if it's a player. Now, the thing is, when I attempted isPlayer, which was a World at War function, that didn't exist in Black Ops 3, or at least with my testing, it didn't seem to work. So my workaround for this was kind of silly, and I'm sure there's another way to do this. In fact, I'll probably look it up and maybe put a little thing on the video here saying what the fix would be for this, like what type of code you would put. But for now, this is what I did for the flogger, and it's just kind of interesting. It's kind of silly, but it does work. Is defined entity dot player name. So what I did here was I just checked if on the entity this variable is defined their player name, and clearly the player name is something that's not on a zombie. Although this would be something that is on a bot, so this wouldn't do just players, this would also do your ally bots, I believe, because when I spawned them in on one of my test runs, it would give them names. So I'm assuming that this would actually count as a bot as well, a bot on your team. So the other thing is you want to probably do another if else here for the zombies, because we don't want to do all different types and whatnot. You could probably check for your boss zombies if you wanted to do something else, but you'd have to have your own variables set up for that. So you can do all these different cases for what happens to each individual thing. The player, what you're probably going to just want to do is kill them. So the basic thing to do would be int do damage, and the nice thing about this, or at least I haven't done any co-op testing yet, is I believe we can actually use do damage. Unlike World at War, what would end up happening is if you use do damage, it would actually, I can guarantee you can use do damage, because when I tested it before with Quick Revive, it didn't end the game, it just killed me, it downed me, which is perfect. So I believe anybody who's curious, I believe you can use do damage now. You don't have to use radius damage to kill a player. So you can use the do damage function, and what you're going to want to do, this is kind of a silly thing that Treyarch always did. The first parameter is going to be the health of the player. And the interesting thing that they always did was they did the health plus 666, which is always something that I like to do. It's a funny thing that they added in. So it's going to do the amount of damage to the player's health plus 666. I guess that just, no matter what, that's going to kill them. So, but you would think if you just did their health, that's going to kill them as well. But, that's what they do, so I'll stick to what they do. The second one is it's the origin of the damage source. So I'm just gonna do where the player is, and you gotta have it defined somewhere. You could put 000 in there, but uh, it's yeah. Typically, you just put the origin of the player. You can do whatever with that, to be honest. I don't think it really matters. It's probably just gonna change the direction of where the blood on your screen is. Um, so if your trap's not actually gonna kill, like say you're doing do damage and you only want it to do 20, like say you're doing an electric trap, you don't want it to kill, so maybe you're doing 20 damage when they're entering it, and then it won't kill them, and you could probably play around with the damage settings so that it doesn't kill with, like it won't kill you with jug, but it will kill you if you don't, sort of thing, like how the electric trap is. But in this case, we're just going to kill the player, so we'll do health plus 666. And that's actually set up for the player already. We're all good. So for the zombie, we're going to want to do uh, a variable on them. Actually, another thing you probably want to do is check if they're dead, but yeah, that's up to you. If you want to check if they're dead, you put in your own parameters there. Check if you want to. There's going to be a list of references and variables and whatnot you can do, but yeah, up to your discretion. Else if, so now we're going to do the zombie. Um, the only thing that I really thought of, like you could put a boss zombie name in here if you had that. Uh, like you could check for dogs if you wanted to do something separate for dogs. But what I like to do here is just check if defined uh, int dot. Uh, well, if it was a, here's the thing. I made my variable, so I did dot flung for the flogger. But if you wanted to do something like say killed, or actually I think the way Treyarch did it was marked for kill, something like that. So what you can do is it's going to come in and it's going to see, oh, this isn't defined, so it's going to do everything in here, and then we'll define it while it's in there. So we'll go, so this is so it does it once, because we don't want it doing multiple times, because what ended up happening with the flogger is the zombies were getting flung by the flogger, and then I guess their origin doesn't change when you kill them, so the body's going to keep going, but their origin's going to stay where they were killed. So what ends up happening is they keep getting flung constantly through the air because they're not what you want it to happen once, but it's just going to keep going through and through and through and just keep doing it over and over again. So what we're going to do here is set up this variable on the entity, which is going to be the zombie in this case, and we're going to do mark for kill. So we'll go when they come in here, ent.mark for kill is equal to true. So then that means the next time that it comes through and it saw this same entity, it's going to see that it's defined and it's not going to do it again. So then what we can do now is ent do damage, and the same idea, health 666 ent dot origin. So we could do something similar to my flogger as well. We could fling them. You could play an effects on them. If you know the effects, you could do ent play effects. Actually, yeah, play effects, and then the name of your effects if you have that. So say you know your effects name, and you got it stored in a variable, then you can put your effects right here, and then it would play it on the zombie. So that's kind of up to you how you want to treat this, but that's how you would play in effects. The issue is you'd have to pre-cache it, and you would also have to set it up in variable before you do this. And I also believe you might have to include that into a zone file as well. But I haven't really played too much with spawning effects yet in Black Ops 3, so I'll have to probably maybe do that in a later tutorial on how to script effects in. But for now, that's just kind of an extra thing there. If you wanted to fling it, then what I would suggest doing, if you wanted to fling the zombie, the thing is, you want to start a ragdoll on the zombie, so I would do start ragdoll. So that's going to turn the zombie into a ragdoll, and then actually you want to start flinging them. I started flinging them before they died. So I would start flinging them before they die, and then kill them, because that seemed to be the way that it worked for me. I'm not sure if it does any difference if you change it around. Um, so after you start the ragdoll, you're going to want to launch it. So um, launch ragdoll, rage doll, ragdoll, and then you would put in the x, y, and z coordinates for. So this is a vector actually for x, y, and z. Uh, so we have to have a second set of parentheses here, just like we did with the move twos. So the thing is, this is basically the power and direction that they're going to get flung in. So if I wanted it to go more in the x direction, I might do 550, and like, I don't know. Actually, I probably want it to be flung in the air pretty good. So maybe I could 250 there. So then that way it would get flung more in the x direction. And you can kind of figure out the angles in radiant of which way your trap is aiming. Um, you could also get the angles from your trap or your trigger and set that up in here and do it scalable. Uh, but that's up to you of how you want to do that. Um, so that should be it for flinging the zombie. There really isn't too much to it other than just starting the ragdoll and calling the launch ragdoll function on it, and then killing it, and then that should be all good. The I believe that's almost it for everything here. We could check. There's a couple of things we can add here actually. So we got the player damage done. We kind of did a little bit of effect stuff there. There's, you got to call it later and whatnot and pre-cache it. We also went over the so the damage flinging the zombie we went over, but that's related to how you want to do your trap. If you want to do an electric trap, obviously they got it provided, so there's no point in scripting it. But maybe you want to do a laser trap and have your own effects and whatnot, and it's only a point beam or something. The other thing you're going to want to do is there's the trap box, and Pi is interfering with my tutorials here. So the other thing is that the trap box, which would be, there's a model in here. So if we bring up M for the models, we do trap, and we got it right here. So basically this is a little trap box that they typically use for, this is where you'd be putting your trigger over, the triggers that we had at the beginning here. So if you had two of them, you would set up two of them and put your triggers over them with the KVP, the target name that you had. So we'd have our trigger over it or whatever, but then we'd also have the handle. The thing is, the handle is going to be in regards to, like, it's going to rotate in regards to the way that it's facing. I believe the way I got it to rotate properly, and like I was saying before, you use rotate pitch, rotate roll, rotate yaw, and then kind of figure out which way is the right way. You can look on Google for the directions of which way those go. But what you'd probably want to do is have it set up for when you actually activated it right here. So I'd probably do it, so we'd probably do something like handle equals get ent. The interesting thing though is how we got to look at a way here that this knows that this trap box knows that it's this handle, or we could have both handles go. So you could do one of two ways. In fact, I'm probably going to do both handles because it probably makes more sense for both handles to get activated. So what you're probably going to want to do is probably set up one here, and what we'll do is you could bring up the entity window and do script. Actually, yeah, script model. So then double click on that. Should now say script model up here in your entity info. When you press N, we want to give it a target name. We'll do this trap handle. The thing is, we're going to copy both of them, or we're going to copy and paste it, get a second one going. And if you wanted this one to just rotate this one, what you could do is just have the trigger target it and then check for the target name in script. But for this case, we're just going to give our own target name and have both of them rotate. So we'll go in and have our trap handle. So we'll go handle. Actually, we'll actually make a separate function for this just to make it a bit simpler. So we'll go thread rotate trap handle, and we'll create a new function. Rotate trap handle. And then we're going to want to get our two handles. So this is going to be an array just like our triggers. So we'll go handles equal get int array, and then we're going to do trap handle, which is what we named it in Radiant. That's a target name. And then we're going to want to loop through the two handles and rotate them. So we'll do a for loop. For I equals 0. I is less than handles.size, because we want to loop through all the handles. And we're going to go from 0 to the size of the array of handles. We're going to increment by 1, so I++. And then we're going to do handles, and then in square brackets I. So we're going to be doing something specifically to the element 0 or element 1 in this loop. So it's going to come through and do both of those handles. So I'm going to go off of the one that I did for the flogger. The handle, I ended up figuring that it worked when I did rotate pitch. So we'll go with rotate pitch, and hopefully that's the one that works for you guys. If it's not, I'm sorry, I don't know why it's like that, but just try rotate pitch, rotate roll, and rotate yow. One of those is going to work. So I would do rotate 180 degrees. I do about 1 second, 0.5 of a second to start spinning up, 0.5 of a second to slow down, and then that will rotate the handle. So that'll loop through our two handles and should be all good. The thing is, we want it to go back when it's done, right? Like, we don't want to just rotate the one time. We want it to rotate down when it's active and then rotate back up when it's not active. So, but you want it to rotate after the cooldown. So why don't we do a neat little trick? Instead of making two functions, one that rotates down and one that rotates up, why don't we just modify our one function so that it knows? We'll put a parameter in here, and I'll just do a boolean, 1 or 0. So we'll do, actually I'll just put true or false to make it easier. So true, and then, actually, you know what, I'm going to go false for this because I know the parameter name that I want to use now. We'll go thread rotate, and then this one will be false. So then our parameter name is going to be reverse. So then if it's true, wait a second. This one's true. Yeah. So this one's false, this one's true. So what ends up happening is it's going to go reverse if this is true. And it's false up here, so it's going to go the original way. So we're going to have an if statement. We're going to go if reverse else. So what will end up happening is, just minus 180 here, same settings for the rotate. So what we'll have is, when it comes in the first time, this is going to be false. So it's going to come in, it's going to rotate down, it's going to do the 180 down, and then when we want to rotate it back up, it'll come in after the cooldown, and it'll rotate handle, this will be true, so then this time it'll be true, and it'll do the negative one. So when it's false, it'll do the positive 180, and then when it's true, it'll do the negative 180. So then that way, we end up getting one function doing both the rotate down and the rotate up. So that kind of sets up the trap box for this. Those will rotate now. Remember, use pitch, roll, or yow, whatever one works. And that should be it for the trap box. The last thing I want to go over is a pretty simple one, but it's depending on if you want to or not. So this is back when we're setting our hint strings for our traps. We can add one extra thing, and that is power. Do you want your trap to require power or not? That's up to you. If it's electronic, probably makes more sense for it to be requiring power, but if it's something that doesn't, then that's up to you of how you want to do that. The interesting thing about the new flag system in Black Ops 3 is they do it set up like you call it as a level function. So level, and then the script is going to be in is flag. So then the function we're going to call is wait underscore till. So flag is the script, wait till is the function, and then the thing that we're waiting to till is power on. So that one line will wait until the power's on before it does everything below here. The other thing that you're probably going to want to do though is, I'm trying to remember, is flag shared. Yep, there it is. You want to include this one line at the top. Using script shared flag shared. So that is going to be our flag functions. We're going to want to include that in there so you can use all the flag stuff so that this line will actually work. The other thing you're going to want to do is it's going to look weird if you go up to the trigger and there's going to be no hint string and you're going to have that icon because this hasn't been called yet because it's still waiting at this line. So what we're going to do is set it up. We're going to set up a new hint string, and the neat thing is they actually we're probably going to want to get our icon going beforehand. So why don't we go and set up the hint no icon before this occurs because we don't want the hand icon there. And the other thing is we're going to do, this is a predefined one that Treyarch's got. This is a string that they have in a string table. So we'll go self set hint string, and then it's an ampersand, so it knows it has to look for a precast string. And the name of the string is zombie need power. Zombie, all this is uppercase, so zombie underscore need underscore power. And it will look for the string that's named zombie need power, and it'll probably be something like requires power. You can put in your own one and take away the ampersand and put in your own thing here, but this is the one Treyarch uses, so that's the one I'll use. So it looks neat. There's all consistency with all of our hint strings and whatnot. So that actually should cover everything for the tutorial. Thanks for watching, guys, and keep an eye out for more tutorials on UGX.